Hello, and welcome to the National Book Festival. My name is Monica Valentine from the Library of Congress. I'm here with Barb Ronsenstock, whose featured book at the festival is Leave It to Abigail, The Revolutionary Life of Abigail Adams. If you'd like to see Barb's presentation at the festival, log on to loc.gov/bookfest. You'll find her presentation on the children's stage. Welcome, Barb. It's great to have you here. If you're ready, we can begin our conversation.
I'm ready, Monica. Sure.
All right. So your most recent book we mentioned was Leave It to Abigail, The Revolutionary Life of Abigail Adams. What inspired you to write it?
Abigail has just always been on my radar as a person that I think might have been more important than I learned in school. Sometimes I get ideas that way, but I really kind of kept putting her off. And I think it's kind of strange because I put her off because I kind of had only learned that she hung laundry in the White House. That's the only fact I ever knew about her. And which is it's kind of weird that as a woman, I would just go, oh, okay, well, she's the one who hung laundry, and just kind of like chalk all of her accomplishments up to that. But I thought, God, there's more to Abigail than I thought. And I just began reading about her. And almost from the very first book, when I read about her business sense, her sense of money, it kind of changed my whole entire world in terms of what Abigail did and what she was capable of. And that's pretty much the inspiration from the book. The business part of Abigail Adams' life was really one of the prime inspirations for the book.
Interesting. Okay, we have a question that's come in from Katie. Katie asks, what inspired you to write about famous painters or artists? What would you say to elementary art teachers to inspire them?
Okay, first of all, art is super important. So thank you for being an art teacher. I'm assuming, Katie, that you are an art teacher. So thank you for your work. And especially now, thank all the teachers for their work, because they are just holding the whole country up in one way or the other. Sure. I write about art. I'm not a particularly gifted, artist visually myself, but I just find the whole process of looking and feeling and putting those two things together just fascinating, and how our famous artists, how different they all were, how different their work processes and their habits all were. I just find the whole thing, just art in general, super fascinating. And so I actually, Mary Grandpré and I have done the Noisy Paintbacks, so Kandinsky and Vincent van Gogh, I'm looking at the wall here, and Chagall, and then we have a book on Monet coming out in the spring. And each of those books were a joy to work on and focus on a different part of art. I just think that art, to inspire art teachers, you have the classroom where sometimes the kids that are trouble or having difficulties other places in the school can come to and really be themselves. And I just find that it's like a safe place for a lot of kids, the art room. And if nothing else, I think that that's really important. I think that art teachers provide a space to feel in school. Not that other teachers don't, but especially in the art room, I think it's important. And some kids really, really need that room. So thanks for doing it.
That is a great point. Here's a question from Dalton. Hello, Mrs. Rosenstock. Why do you enjoy historical fiction and nonfiction? Why is it important to inform children about the important women in our nation's history?
Well, hello, Dalton. I enjoy true stories. It's historical fiction and nonfiction, but it's mostly, I think of them as just true stories. And it's pretty much because I'm going to show you guys a picture. This is my grandpa. He's right. Whoops. Other way. That's him. And he's leaning over and telling me a story in that picture. And every picture I have, he's leaning over and telling me a story. And most of his stories were true. They were about events in his life, people he had known, his immigrant parents, the old countries that my family came from. And that idea that true stories still had resonance, still meant something to us now, really kind of was ingrained in me since I was a kid. I don't believe in telling history stories just because they were old history stories. In fact, I really don't like stories like that. I really want to bring history stories in and have them connect in some way to what's going on now with kids today. And so that's really what I try to do. And what's the only thing that's really women or men's stories or any different stories, I'm not sure that I think that one is more important than the other, Dalton, but I do feel that many, many women's stories, like many stories of any marginalized group in the country, have been ignored in favor of the dominant group stories. And so I just think it's more important that children know about some women just because they don't tend to be featured as often. So I guess that would be my answer to that one.
Okay. Can you give us a little background on how you became interested in Abigail Adams?
Yeah, I can. She just was, like I said before, she was on my radar. And then what happened is I actually went to a visit to her home. Well, actually, John Adams' birthplace, which actually looks like this, if any kids are out there watching. This is John Adams' house, not what we would think of. I mean, not what I guess I anticipated. And then Abigail, and that was where John Adams was born. And then he and Abigail set up housekeeping in a home right next door to his parents. And when I visited the house, it kind of changed everything about the way I thought about Abigail. Because I saw her things. I saw her, there's still been some preservation of her tools, her fireplace. I have, just to show you guys, I have a picture of her attic, and that's the stairway. I don't know if you guys can see it. This is the stairway going up into the attic. And just to be able to go and walk up that narrow staircase where Abigail, went up and down the stairs and feeding the Revolutionary soldiers that were up in that attic, billeted, which means sleeping over, billeted in her attic, and that she fed them and she brought broth up and down the stairs, and her work ethic, the visit to her home to see her real objects and the real environment where she lived her life, her tools, her kitchen stuff, her clothing. And then as she and John, as John became more prominent and then became president, and then after the presidency, just to see how their life changed. They had more material things, but she was still a pretty hard worker. So that is really the visit to Abigail Adams' homes, and John Adams' homes. I always call them Abigail's. They really were John's too. Just really changed everything. It did. Changed everything about how I thought about her.
It's great that so much of her stuff was preserved.
Yeah, it was. Yeah. It was.
Yeah. So what do you think are the major themes that emerge from Leave It to Abigail, and how do they relate to our world?
Abigail was competent. And like a lot of women, and I would say girls too, even now, she at times had to, the society was telling her to kind of hide that competence. If and Abigail just really had a great sense of herself, which is something that I think young girls have. And then sometimes it gets kind of socialized or kind of pulled out of us as we get older. And Abigail really never lost it, even living in a society that was, I would say, obviously a less free in terms of what women could do. I mean, she certainly didn't have the vote. She didn't have the rights to her own children. Technically, if you were married, your husband owned your everything, your property, your family. You had to ask permission to do most anything of your husband. And but Abigail kept that sense of competence, and she was kind of like a quiet worker. She just went ahead and did what she felt needed to be done. And I find that that's a very modern idea. I think most moms do that. Most working women do that. They kind of just get the job done. The famous line in Hamilton, immigrants, they get the job done. Sometimes I think, if it was a different story, I think it could have been women, we get the job done, So that's, I guess, that's that answer.
Okay. Well, we have another question here from Daniela, who's watching with her 6-year-old daughter.
Okay.
And her daughter asks, who is your favorite artist?
Oh, that is a really tough question. I think right now it's whatever one I'm working on most recently. So right now it would be Monet, but in general, it's kind of Marc Chagall. And that is, again, because of my grandfather. When I got older, he actually took me. I live near Chicago, outside of Chicago, and we have Chagall windows at the Art Institute of Chicago. There are some Chagall windows that were installed in the late 1970s, and my grandfather took me to see them really within the first couple of months when they were installed. And you walk down the stairs. If you ever have a chance to come to Chicago, come to the Art Institute. You walk down the stairs, and you are literally enveloped in this beautiful blue color. It is the most beautiful blue. Daniela's daughter, if you can just draw the most beautiful, prettiest, heavenly blue you've ever seen, it's like that, but it fills the whole room. And ever since that experience, I almost kind of felt like Chagall was giving me a hug. And that's why that's in the book, Through the Window. In the Chagall book, Through the Window, I do talk about blue being a hug, and it came from that experience.
Wow. Okay, more questions about art. Katie asks, how do you choose who to work with to illustrate your stories?
Katie, authors don't get to choose that. That is the job of an art director at a publishing company. So I send in the story, which is usually looks like about a 5-page typewritten story. And that story goes to an editor, and that editor works with an art director, and they choose the artists. Now, I have been so thankful because I have been paired with, Caldecott, winners, Mordecai Gerstein, and I'm looking up my wall of artists here. Mary Grandpre won a Caldecott for The Noisy Paint Box, and just so many. I mean, Sarah Green, Elizabeth Badley, the illustrator from Leave It to Abigail. Liz Badley is also the illustrator from the I Dissent, the RBG book. Catherine Roy, just a lot of terrific artists, but I don't choose them at all. I get paired up.
Interesting. All right, we have another
marriage. It's fine. It works great.
It's been working for you so far.
Yeah, absolutely, Monica. It does.
We have another question from Dalton. What inspired you to begin writing? What advice do you have for new writers?
Dalton, I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I was not a big writer in school, in elementary school. It scared me. I thought it was really hard. I think writing is really hard. And I think sometimes, grown-ups kind of forget how hard it is for kids to even sometimes even physically move a writing utensil or physically work, the computer. Because our hand, at the time your hands are small and things take more time when you're little. And so in writing, when I was in school, I also always felt like I was making mistakes. Like, oh my gosh, I spelled that wrong. I forgot to capitalize a letter. I always was really tense about writing. And never really thought about doing it as a job. I did a completely different thing. I was in advertising and marketing communications for years and years, and then stayed home with the kids. So I was a mom. And something about reading to my own sons, they liked true stories. I was reading to them, and I thought, gosh, I wish that some more true stories were more like stories the way my grandpa used to tell. Just tell me the story. I don't want to not want really facty stuff. I just really like narrative. And that's story. It was just narrative. And so I used to make up stories when I didn't like, I thought of the words in a book where it's like something I just thought was like maybe a little boring, or I would have, I thought, oh, I could have told this story better. I would read to my sons by just like telling the story and using the pictures. And out of that, I just started writing some of them down. And then this whole thing kind of became something that I do. So I was not a kid who loved to write. I was a kid who loved to read and loved books, and still do, love the library, still do. But I just thought writing was really hard. So.
Okay. We have a question from Laura that's following up on Dalton's question. Yeah. What is the typical path to publishing a children's book once you have a draft completed?
Well, I don't know, because I think that everybody's path is a little different. So I'm not sure that there's a typical one. For most of us, you need to have one draft completed. And I wouldn't even call it a draft. It really, you need to make sure that you've read it out loud a billion times and that you've had other people who are professionals read it and make sure that it's something that, might be publishable. And then you begin sending it out. You send out at the time, back in about 10 years ago now, I guess I started, I sent it to different editors who I thought, might publish a book like that. And you get a lot of rejection letters, like a lot of them. I think I show kids on a scroll that like I have at least 25 rejection letters for only my very first story. And it's the story that actually became the camping trip that changed America, but it got rejected like 25 times before that happened. So it's a process of either either writing directly to editors and publishing houses, or of course you can always find a literary agent. That's a thing. In that case, usually you need between like 3 and 5 manuscripts that would be ready to go, not just one. And then that agent, if they accept you for representation, they'll go ahead and try to sell your work. So that's kind of typically how it works, but each of us has kind of a different little story on it. So.
Okay. I will note that you have written a lot of biographies.
Yes, I have.
And of all the biographies you've written, what were some of the surprising things you found out about your subjects?
Oh my goodness, that is so okay. I can go through each one, but I'm not going to. But my surprising things I found out. For example, Prairie Boy, I just wrote a book not too long ago on Frank Lloyd Wright. And I had no idea that the flamboyant, the adult Frank Lloyd Wright, who was just this kind of flamboyant, very sure of himself man, was actually a really pretty depressed, shy, sad young boy. And to me, that contrast is really cool. I already told you for Abigail, it's the fact that she really ran the finances of the Adams family. John was not good at money. They would have been broke. He was just off writing political legal treatises. Like that was his thing. And Abigail kept the house running, the farm running, the children fed, worried about their investments for the future and for their retirement. Could they afford a bigger house? Could they afford more land? That was all Abigail's to handle in a time when women couldn't even sign a contract. Couldn't even have rented their own room if they needed a room or a room at the inn. They could not have done that. And Abigail was in charge of everything. For every single book, I learned something just amazing. Ben Franklin invented swim fins. I mean, I kind of made a whole book out of that. Like, who knew? I didn't know that, right? The Library of Congress was really based, Library of Congress, on Thomas Jefferson's library that there was a Library of Congress. It burned in the War of 1812. It was burned. And then Thomas Jefferson went, wow, we really need books as a country. So how about you guys take mine? Will you take mine? I'm going to donate them to you. I find something fascinating out every time. And the reason that I write biography is because people's stories, and that goes for anybody who's listening to this now, the people that you meet every day, and the people in the past, people's stories are so powerful. I always think of the fact that like little kids, when we're all babies, that the one thing that they say across humanity, that we're drawn to human faces. And I think for me that never left. And so I'm also drawn to human stories. Like I will almost always want to know about the people who did something, not just the event itself.
Wow,
So
that's awesome. Okay, here's another great question from Anne. She says, that's a great story about making up new text while reading to your sons. Do your sons realize how this changed your life? And do you tell them the stories from your grandpa?
Okay, they're 26 and 21. If anyone has children of that age, children, meaning men, young men of that age, I have told them that I would not be a writer if I hadn't been a mother and hadn't read them. But whether they appreciate it or not, they're of an age where it's not not their job to appreciate it right now. Do I tell them my grandfather's stories? Yes. And I'm lucky enough that my mother and father are still alive, and it's my mother's father. So my mother can also tell them my grandfather's stories. So they know a fair amount of them. They really do. They know a fair amount of them, especially the funnier ones.
Okay. Barb, do you believe that your books appeal to a specific audience? And do you think about that audience when you're writing?
I think I write with some kind of third grader in the back of my mind, of any type. I mean, it's not necessarily a girl or a boy. It's not a certain, race or religion, but it's kind of a third grader. However, I, as an adult, oh, you see the dog back there. We are live. There's the dog. Her name is Nikki, in case anybody wants to know. I had totally lost, the dog made me lose my train of thought. Of course. What was I talking about, Monica?
We were talking about, the question was, do you believe your books appeal to a specific audience? And do you think about that audience when you're writing? You'd mentioned that you have third graders in the back of your mind.
Right. I always have third graders in the back of my head, but I, as an adult, love picture books. The reason I got into this is reading picture books to my own children. And that was a genre that I didn't know anything about. I did not have a lot of picture books read to me when I was a child. So I still love them as an adult. I still have this, Jackie Woodson's The Day You Begin. I love that book. Like, I love it for me. So I also do think that picture books not only can be used in all kinds of classrooms and all kinds of settings, but I kind of think that they should. It's one of the few, with graphic novels, it's one of the few kinds of literature that uses, our eyes, all of our visual senses, all of our auditory senses, especially if someone's reading it out loud, and all of our reading skills kind of like all at the same time. And they can just be like such great, like touchers of the heart picture books. I mean, I just love them. So my audience is like, I always think, wow, I know how people could use this in high school, and I know how they could use it in middle school, and I know how it could be with elementary school, but somehow in the back of my mind, I'm writing for a third grader. So.
Okay. We have a question from Mona. She says, I have a good concept for a middle school age children series, but I'm not a writer. Is a ghostwriter an option?
I don't know anything about that, Mona. I've got to tell you, I don't write middle grade, and I've never heard of, I don't really know that much about ghostwriting. I would think that, I would think that you should try. That's what I would say to anybody. When you say, I am not a writer, that's like me saying, I am not an artist. And Jarrett Lerner, if anybody knows him, the author and illustrator, Jarrett Lerner, has a thing where he's like, everybody stop saying what you aren't. Stop saying what you can't do in terms of art or in terms of creativity. I think that you might be a writer. If you have a good concept, an idea for a middle grade series, and you know about it, and you know about middle grade children, and you know what a middle grade series is, I really want to challenge you to try to write it. So how's that for an answer?
That is a great answer.
If you have a chapter, I want to see it. So.
Great answer. So we have another question from Lori.
Yeah.
If you don't do illustrations yourself, do you still write with some kind of idea of the illustrations or outline of what they should be? Or does the book get sold to the publisher with just the text?
The book gets sold to the publisher with just the text. Do I have an idea of what the illustrations should be? No, because every artist I have ever worked with on a book together, we're a team. And my job, in a way, picture book authoring is to write half of a story. For narrative nonfiction, I think of it as writing half of the story, and I'm saving the other half. I'm leaving space in the story for another professional, an artist professional, to do their job and add in the other half of the story. So, and in every single case, all the illustrators that I've worked with have just totally expanded and improved and enriched my text. So they are super talented at that. The only thing I may have in mind, and you know, I don't know if anybody knows anything about when you write a story manuscript, you can sometimes put in art notes, but I try really hard not to have almost any. I might just say like this person was born in 1914 or something, just to give the artist, you know, like some sense, and the editor some sense of where we were at. But no, I don't really write with pictures in mind, because I know that when I get an illustrator, the pictures are going to blow me out of the water, and anything that I could think of is not going to be as good as what they can all think of. So I know that sounds really strange. It's hard for people, I think, who haven't worked in a creative team like that, to understand that that's how it works, but it honestly works better that way. It really does.
Okay, Barb, I want to give you some time so that you can tell us what's next for you. What are you working on? What's coming up next? I know you mentioned a book about Monet.
I do have a book about Monet. I don't think I have anything I can show you, though. But there is a book about Monet. It's called Mornings with Monet. It is it's coming out in, I believe, March of 2021. It is about Claude Monet once he already was famous. And it is a story about how art is magic, but art is also work. And so it's kind of about, if anybody's interested in like writing process or art process and things like that, it really is a book about Monet's process, specifically how he painted. It is not like a birth to death, long biography where he starts in childhood and he goes all the way until, the end of his career. It really is a little slice. In fact, the entire book takes place in, 4 hours. I think the whole book from beginning to end is 4 hours of Claude Monet's life. But in that 4 hours, we kind of learn a whole lot about him. After that, I have some books about monarch science coming out, which is great. And then something about the Sargasso Sea, which is not a biography. So there you go. I'm trying to challenge myself. If that was Mona, who I challenged to write the book, that she wants to get a ghostwriter, I challenged my own self, and I'm trying to continue to do so. I did not. My Sargasso Sea book is not a biography. I hope to do more that are not, and I hope actually to start a little bit of a verse novel pretty soon. So we'll see how it goes.
That all sounds pretty exciting.
It is pretty exciting for a Sunday morning. I just made myself tired on Sunday morning.
Well, I just have one more quick question for you. Yeah. What do you most want readers to gain from reading your work?
A sense of the importance of their own history, their own individual history. I want every child to realize that history is not what some famous people that aren't us, on kids and, did. History is what you're doing now, right? Whoever you are, right? You're a part of it. It's kind of like a giant river, and we're all a drop of water. And there is no such thing as, important people and not important people. Things in history are moved along by all kinds of people, known and unknown. And in most cases, my latest book, which is Fight of the Century, it's back here somewhere, a Fight of the Century about, there it is, right there, about Alice Paul. I really understood that while I was reading about Alice Paul, there were so many women who contributed, whose names we don't even know, to the fact that women can vote now. And I just want kids to understand that their stories are important. They are, very.
Thank you. That is a great note to end on. And that's all the questions we have time for today. Thank you very much, Barb Ronsenstock, for sharing your time with us so generously. We've been speaking with Barb Ronsenstock, whose latest book is Leave It to Abigail, The Revolutionary Life of Abigail Adams. You can find her presentation on the children's stage of the National Book Festival at loc.gov/bookfest. Thanks to our audience out there. We hope all of you will take the time to explore our many programs and enjoy the remainder of the National Book Festival.